The works of J.R.R. Tolkien have served as the inspiration to painters, musicians, filmmakers and writers, to such an extent that Tolkien is sometimes seen as the father of the entire genre of high fantasy. The production of such derivative works is sometimes of doubtful legality, because Tolkien's published works will remain in copyright until 2043. The film, stage and merchandise rights of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings are owned by Tolkien Enterprises, while the rights of The Silmarillion and other material remain with the J.R.R. Tolkien Estate Limited. Do not laugh, but once upon a time I had a mind to make a body of more or less connected legend, ranging from the large and cosmogonic to the level of romantic fairy story. The cycles should be linked to a majestic whole, and yet leave scope for other minds and hands, wielding paint and music and drama, absurd, art and illustration. The earliest illustrations of Tolkien's works were drawn by the author himself. In 1937, The Hobbit was first illustrated by professional draftsmen for the American edition. Tolkien was very critical of these, and in 1946 he rejected illustrations by Horace Engels for the German edition of The Hobbit as too Disneyfied. Milan Kosman illustrated Farmer Giles of Ham in 1948, and Tolkien was not happy with this work either. In 1949, Kosman was replaced by Pauline Baynes, who became Tolkien's favorite illustrator and who created drawings for the adventures of Tom Bombadil as well as for Farmer Giles of Ham. In 1968, Tolkien was sent a number of a suite of illustrations of The Lord of the Rings, mostly in colored ink, by English artist Mary Fairbairn. Tolkien said of her pictures, "They show far more attention to the text than any that have yet been submitted to me." I am beginning to think that an illustrated edition might be a good thing. For various reasons the project went no further, and Fairbairn's illustrations were unknown until 2012. Crown Princess Margaret of Denmark, an accomplished and critically acclaimed painter, was inspired to illustrations to The Lord of the Rings in the early 1970s. She sent them to Tolkien, who was struck by the similarity to the style of his own drawings. In 1977, Queen Margrethe's drawings were published in the Danish translation of the book, which was reissued in 2002. Redrawn by the British artist Eric Fraser, Tim and Greg Hildebrandt were also well-known Tolkien illustrators during the first decades after the publication of The Lord of the Rings. In the 1970s, British artist Jimmy Corti created a best-selling poster of The Hobbit for the retailer Athena. Probably the widest-known Tolkien illustrators of the 1990s and 2000s are John Howe, Alan Lee, and Ted Nasmith. Alan Lee for illustrated editions of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, Ted Nasmith for illustrated editions of The Silmarillion, and John Howe for the cover artwork to several Tolkien publications. Howe and Lee were also involved in the creation of Peter Jackson's film trilogy as concept artists. Nasmith was also invited to take part in the films, but was forced to reluctantly decline due to a personal crisis at the time. In 2004, Lee won an Academy Award for Best Art Direction for his work on the film The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. Other artists who have found inspiration in Tolkien's works include Catherine Karina Schmiel, Inga Edelfeldt, Anke Eisman, Roger Garland, Michael Haig, Tove Jansson, Jay Johnston, Paul Raymond Gregory, Tim Kirk, Angus McBride, Jeff Murray, Kay Miner, Billy Mosick, Colleen Doran, Jenny Dolphin, Maciej Kadal and Peter Xavier Price. Film. Tolkien originally sold the film, stage and merchandise rights of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings to United Artists in 1968, but they never made a film, and in 1976 the rights were sold to Tolkien Enterprises, a division of the Saul Zaentz Company. In the early 70s John Boorman was planning a film of The Lord of the Rings, but the plans never went further because of movie studio politics. Some of the work done was resurrected for the film Excalibur in 1981. Ralph Bakshi directed an animated movie adaptation of The Lord of the Rings in 1978, which covered only the first half of The Lord of the Rings. Rankin Bass covered the second half with a children's TV animation The Return of the King. Earlier they had made a TV animation of The Hobbit. The Lord of the Rings was adapted as a trilogy of films, directed by Peter Jackson. The Hobbit was also adapted as a trilogy, with some elements adapted from The Return of the King's appendices. The split of Tolkien's works between Tolkien Enterprises and the Tolkien estate means that none of the Tolkien Enterprises products can include source material from outside The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and therefore a film or stage version of the Silmarillion is highly unlikely. Comparisons have been made to the plot of the science fiction television show Babylon 5 and Tolkien's works. Games. There are multiple model-based games, trading card games, board games and video games that take place in Middle-earth, most depicting scenes and characters from The Lord of the Rings. In a broader sense, many fantasy role-playing games such as Dungeons & Dragons and Dragon Quest were strongly influenced by Tolkien's works. Such games feature creatures such as orcs, trolls, elves, dwarves, halflings, hence which are common to Tolkien's mythos even if they do not take place in Middle-earth. Video games. The books have been reproduced in video game form a number of times during the 1980s and 2000s, including Melbourne House's Lord of the Rings, Shadows of Mordor, War in Middle-earth, Interplay's Lord of the Rings Volume 1 and Lord of the Rings Volume 2. Electronic Arts action platformer adaptations of The Two Towers and The Return of the King. Real-time strategy games The Lord of the Rings, The Battle for Middle-earth and The Lord of the Rings, The Battle for Middle-earth 2, and the role-playing game The Lord of the Rings, The Third Age, all based on the Jackson films, and Sierra Entertainment's action platformer based on The Fellowship of the Ring. There is also a PSP game titled The Lord of the Rings Tactics based on the Jackson films, a MMORPG by Turbine, The Lord of the Rings Online, Shadows of Angmar. The Two Towers is also set in Tolkien's world. LEGO's licensed theme game version had Japanese anime graphics. Other games. Games Workshop have made a miniature war game called The Lord of the Rings Strategy Battle Game, which, while part of the film trilogy's merchandise, combines elements from both the books and films. Many of Games Workshop's other battle games that are not directly related to the books have had some key background based on it. Several other games have been based directly on The Lord of the Rings and related works, including, amongst many, Iron Crown Enterprises' Middle-earth role-playing game and Middle-earth collectible card game, as well as the Lord of the Rings trading card game made by Decipher Inc. All of these predate Jackson's film trilogy except for Decipher's card game, which is part of the latter's merchandise. Decipher also created the Lord of the Rings role-playing game, a role-playing game based on the Jackson films. Board games include Risk, Lord of the Rings Trilogy Edition and another simply entitled Lord of the Rings, as well as the Middle-earth games from Simulations Publications, Inc., containing the games War of the Ring, Gondor and Sauron in 1977. A more recent strategic game covering all three books, called War of the Ring, was released in 2004. There are also Trivial Pursuit and Monopoly editions based on The Lord of the Rings, as well as of The Lord of the Rings trivia game quiz game. Chess sets have also been created with the figures based on people and other characters from The Lord of the Rings. Homages. The creators of the Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game were also strongly influenced by Tolkien. The game has dwarves and elves as playable characters, and formerly had hobbits as well. After being threatened with a lawsuit by the Salzance Company, Tolkien Enterprises, they replaced hobbits with the similar halflings, a term also used in The Lord of the Rings. Balrogs with Balor demons and other genericized names. In most versions of the game, halflings were especially good at being thieves, rogues, a nod to Bilbo the Thief in The Hobbit. His works also indirectly inspired the Warcraft series via the use in Games Workshop's battle games. Equally common is the use of the term orc for a variety of hobgoblin-type creatures in later fantasy, although Tolkien popularized this modern usage of the word. Even more removed genre games such as Shadowrun and Warhammer 40,000 use the term therein spell talk, possibly to sidestep possible legal issues. Radio plays. 3 radio plays based on The Lord of the Rings have been made, broadcast in 1955, 1956, 1979 and 1981 respectively. The first and last ones were produced by the BBC. Music. Numerous songs have been inspired by or refer to the fiction of J.R.R.Tolkien. Rock music. Progressive rock acts like Rush, mostly Autumn, Bo Hansen and indie rock band Gatsby's American Dream have composed several songs based on Tolkien's characters and stories. Camels. Nimrodel. The Procession, The White Rider, is obviously about Gandalf. Rock band Led Zeppelin has numerous songs inspired by Tolkien's works. Tom Rapp set most of the verse of the One Ring to music as Ring Thing in Pearls Before Swine's second album, Balaclava. Bob Catley, lead singer of the British prog rock band Magnum, released a solo album titled Middle-earth, themed around The Lord of the Rings. The East Texas-based rock band Hobbit has produced multiple albums inspired by Tolkien's work. Many heavy metal acts have been influenced by Tolkien. Blind Guardian has written many songs relating to Middle-earth, including the full concept album Nightfall in Middle-earth that follows the Silmarillion, almost all of Summoning's songs and the entire discography of battle lore are Tolkien-themed. Power metal bands like Epidemia, Nightwish, and others feature Tolkien-themed songs. This Day We Fight, a song by thrash metal band Megadeth from the album Endgame, was based on the mythos of Tolkien. Also, the Italian progressive band Ainur have composed several albums inspired by Silmarillion stories in early 2000s. The Irish Celtic metal band Cruachan released a song called The Fall of Gondolin on their album Pagan. The band Sabaton has a song named Shadows Focus based on the Black King, following orders from Sauron to take back the ring. Some bands and certain musicians use Tolkien legendarium for the stage names. Progressive rock band Marillion derive the name from the Silmarillion. Gorgoroth take the name from an area of Mordor. Burzum take the name from the Black Speech of Mordor. Cirithungol take the name from the pass on the western path of Mordor. The dwelling of the spider Shaloban and Amarth take the name after an alternative name for Mount Doom. Lead singer of Dimmu Borgir, Shagrath, also takes his stage name from The Lord of the Rings, after an orc captain. Jazz music. Australian jazz musician and composer John Sangster made a response to Tolkien's work with the Hobbit suite, and the 4-double LP CD sets The Lord of the Rings, a musical interpretation, v. 1-3, a recorded 1975-77 MD 3251, 3252, 3253, and Landscapes of Middle-earth MD 3254. Folk music. Sally Oldfield's first solo album, Waterbearer, was inspired by Tolkien's works, particularly Songs of the Quendi. The Hobbiton's was the name of a Dutch folk group who released a CD in 1996, containing 16 tracks of poems by J.R.R. Tolkien, from The Hobbit, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, and The Lord of the Rings. Production was with permission of the Tolkien estate, with the provision that it would not be sold commercially. The CD is sold out. Irish singer Enu contributed song May It Be for the Fellowship of the Ring movie soundtrack. It was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song. She also released a song entitled Lothlorien on her 1991 album Shepherd Moons. In 2001, bluegrass and anti-folk artist Crystal released an instrumental album titled Not All Who Wander Are Lost, referencing Gandalf's words to Bilbo and Bilbo's poem about Aragorn. On the album is a song titled Riddles in the Dark, which is the title of one of the chapters of The Hobbit. The album was released with Sugar Hill Records. The Celtic foursome Brasiliand has released the Starlit Duel, setting to music selected songs by Tolkien. Other folk rock and new age musicians inspired by Tolkien include Safumi, Nickel Creek, David Arkenstone and Lyriel, among others. The Spanish neoclassical dark wave band Narcelian derived its name from Tolkien's song Narcelian about the creation of sun and moon, and also their albums are thematically inspired by Tolkien's Legendarium. Classical film score music. Donald Swann set music in the British art song tradition to The Road Goes Ever On, a collection of Tolkien's lyrics and poems. The work was approved by Tolkien himself. Incio Costa composed in 1980-1982 a chamber music series called Music of Middle-earth, with movements like The Awakening of Shire, Incantation, Winding Paths, Lament of Galadriel, Riders of Rohan, and Grey Havens. Johann de Maij's First Symphony, The Lord of the Rings, is in 5 movements, each illustrating a personage or an important episode from the novel. Gandalf, Lothlorien, Gollum, Journey in the Dark, Hobbits. The symphony was written between March 1984 and December 1987, and was premiered in Brussels on the 15th of March 1988. Jacqueline Clark's setting T. Nouvelle for countertenor solo, SATB choir, and piano accompaniment has been published in score, but not yet recorded. Leonard Rosenman composed music for the Ralph Bakshi animated movie, and Howard Shore composed the music for the 3 Peter Jackson films. Stephen Oliver composed his incidental music score for the 1981 BBC radio drama adaptation of The Lord of the Rings. Paul Caulfield Godfrey has written a large number of works based on Tolkien, the most significant of which is the 4-evening cycle on the Silmarillion, but also including 3 operas based on The Lord of the Rings: Tom Bombadil, The Black Gate Is Closed, and The Grey Havens. He has also published several sets of songs, including 7 Tolkien songs, Songs of the Mark and Shadow Bride. His 3rd symphony, Ainulindale, is based on the opening chapter of the Silmarillion, and there is also a half-hour setting of the Lay of Eärendil based on Bilbo's song at Rivendell. and L. All the texts were used with permission of the Tolkien estate and HarperCollins publishers. The Tolkien Ensemble published 4 CDs from 1997 to 2005 with the aim to create the world's first complete musical interpretation of the poems and songs from The Lord of the Rings. The project was given approval by both the Tolkien estate and HarperCollins publishers. Queen Margaret II of Denmark gave permission to use her illustrations in the CD layout. Olle Saarinen, one of the leading classical music composer of Finland, had composed his 7th symphony named The Dreams of Gandalf in 1996, as a commission by the Gothenburg Symphony Orchestra. Patrick Flagg, late husband of Tolkien illustrator Mary Fairbairn, composed a piano suite, Anduin, a Mighty River, recorded by Wendy Rowlands. A.R. Rahman collaborated with Vartina to compose the music for the stage adaptation, The Lord of the Rings musical, The Loss and the Silence, a string quartet by Ezekiel Vinau. The piece was commissioned for the 100th anniversary of the Juilliard School and was premiered by the Juilliard String Quartet. Parodies. The National Lampoon published a parody book, Lord of the Rings. The BBC produced a parody radio serial, Hordes of the Things. The VeggieTales episode Lord of the Beans. The Dork of the Rings is a film by Richardson Productions LLC and stars Bryce Cohn as Frodo Buggins. The film features an introduction by Lord of the Rings actor and stuntman Kiran Shah. Translator Dmitry Puchkov released funny translations of the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy, in which the original text is overdubbed with parodied translation. The films are dubbed Fellas and the Ring, The Two Blown Away Towers, and Return of the Hobo. Later these funny translations were printed as books. The Last Ringbearer is a 1999 fantasy novel by Kirill Eskov in the form of a parallel novel showing the war from Sauron's perspective, under the notion that the original is a history written by the victors. In 2002, the Comedy Central television series South Park lampooned Tolkien's vision in an episode titled The Return of the Fellowship of the Ring to the Two Towers. The Canadian animated television series Odd Job Jack had an episode in the 2nd season called The Lord of the Three-Ringed Binder, which parodied The Lord of the Rings as well as the division between the sciences and humanities. Scholarship. Tolkien has also been the subject of a number of academic works. Vinyartengwa and Parma Elderlambrana journals focusing on linguistic study of Tolkien's works, while Tolkien Studies focuses on his works in general.